MEDDIC was never meant to be a checklist. That quote comes from today's guest, Dick Dunkel, one of the men who created MEDDIC back in 1996 after spotting repeatable patterns in why deals are won or lost.
Gathering that information, analyzing it, and really coming up with those themes. I think the following year then we actually moved to something called the 8-step sales process.
Since then, he has helped shape some of the most iconic sales orgs in tech, from IBM to Celonis, and enabled thousands of sellers to stop guessing and start executing with clarity.
You can use it as a qualification framework. You can use it as a deal review process. You can use it as a sales competency framework. When you're adopting this or you're implementing this, the most important thing is that you make it your own. I would love for you to do this exercise, and then if you come up with something different than MEDDIC, call me.
Even today, most sales teams still misuse MEDDIC. They treat it like a form, like a checklist, and they fill in the boxes. And then they wonder why their deals are stalled.
If you have an 8-step process like we had at PTC, right, you can layer MEDDIC across those stages to make sure that your deals are progressing as you're expecting. What's the value that you would need to receive, Mr. Customer, in order for you to make this kind of investment?
In this conversation, we go back to the origins of MEDDIC and unpack why it was created and how it's supposed to work and where most sales teams go wrong.
It became very obvious that these were the 6 things that were the essential ingredients to why we were winning. MEDDIC was sort of the foundation, but then from there we actually moved into sort of a process and then eventually sort of learned how to marry those things together.
We will explore, is MEDDIC still relevant or has modern sales moved on? What separates teams that win with MEDDIC from those who fake it? And how do top sellers use it to tell better and more compelling stories? The answers to those questions and much more you will hear in today's episode. Let's get into it. Okay, yeah, finally we're recording. Yeah, it took some time. Where should we start, Dick? So, in 1996, you spotted a recurring theme in successful deals.
That's right.
And this is what became MEDDIC today.
That's right.
Can you tell us more what happened back in the day in 1996?
Yeah.
That became to be MEDDIC today?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. I had sort of leading up to that had been a sales rep with Xerox Engineering Systems. I went on to PTC. PTC was a very, very dynamic, exciting company, growing rapidly. I was a sales rep in Eastern Pennsylvania, calling on sheet metal fabricators and discrete mechanical engineering products, selling design through manufacturing solution, and was very successful at doing that for a couple of years. And then I received an invitation to move into their sales development program, and I relocated myself, my wife, who was pregnant at the time, and my 2-year-old son, and we moved to Massachusetts. And began working, worked for a woman by the name of Ann Gary, who worked for John McMahon, and was there to develop this intermediate sales training class. And so it was during that time that we began doing this exercise called Why Do We Win, Why Do We Lose, and Why Do Deals Slip? And then doing, as you described, really gathering that information, analyzing it, bucketing the answers and really coming up with those themes. And, really to make a long story short, I mean, it became very obvious that these were the 6 things that were the essential ingredients to why we were winning. The absence of those things is why we were losing, and certain things, were directly impacting, causing deals to slip. So, the original acronym of metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, decision process, the identification of pain, and champions, right? We really found like that those were the essential things that we had to be focusing on. And so, kind of the rest is history. We really did, I think, a great job of rolling it out across the entire company with the sponsorship and leadership of John and the president of the company, Dick Harrison, my colleague and I, Jack Napoli, traveled around the world, rolled it out. There was no WebEx in 1996, right? So we're doing a lot of in-person events, but really in partnership with sales leadership really drove the adoption of that. And it had a real impact on the organization. We were able to accelerate onboarding. We were able to reduce turnover. We were able to help the company grow from being a $300 million company to a $1 billion software company over the course of the time that I was there. So it was a very exciting time. And then, years later, as many of those sales leaders were venturing off to become VPs of sales, CROs at other companies, every single one of them took it with them. And so that really was the beginning of the proliferation of MEDDIC.
Before we continue with the conversation, I have one little favor to ask you. If this conversation brings value to you, can you please hit the subscribe button down below so we can help to reach more sales reps and sales leaders like you every week? Thank you.
So it was more like a, I would say, coincidental discovery, it seems to me, not a planned process. It was not planned to, hey, we need to invent some type of qualification methodology.
That is exactly right.
More like an organic process in, hey, I think we found out something here.
Yes, and actually, I think that's a very good observation, is that, as a result of this activity, when I originally approached John, I said, we have something. Yeah. And honestly, I wasn't really sure what it was. But I think that John and the rest of the leadership team there, they were like, well, we really should make sure that we incorporate this into our training and really make it part of our, sales process. And so that was the beginning. And then that was followed, I think the following year, then we actually moved to something called the 8-step sales process. Mm-hmm. So, MEDDIC was sort of the foundation, but then from there we actually moved into sort of a process and then eventually sort of learned how to marry those things together.
So you would say that the sales process and the qualification methodology are two different things. Clearly they are.
Yeah.
And MEDDIC can be applied to any sales process. It sits on top of the sales process.
That's right.
Now today, MEDDIC is one of the most widely used sales frameworks. A lot of people call it sales framework, but it's a qualification methodology per se. But it's interesting now when you are explaining that story.
If I can just interrupt for 1 second, I'll just say, if you were to say, what is it?
Yeah.
You can put a label on something, right? But the problem with labels, right, is that when you label something, right, you can minimize it, you can trivialize it. You put it in a box, and you're like, oh, that's just what it is. But at the end of the day, what it really is it's all the reasons why we win, it's all the reasons why we lose, and it's all the reasons why deals slip. And if you remember that, it really becomes a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
You can use it as a qualification framework. Yeah. You can use it as a deal review process. You can use it as a sales competency framework, right? It really, I think the best organizations recognize that, you want to be able to have less tools that are more effectively implemented. And when you do that, right, you're going to get better utility, better adoption. And so it really needs to become the common language across, and it really becomes a cultural thing, right? And I know you've been a part of organizations where it really is a part of the culture, right? It's part of the sales culture. And I think that for those organizations, right, they really learn the language, and it really becomes a standard of expectation and performance. And that's what makes it stick. And there's nothing about it that you could say, oh, that's outdated, or, oh, no, we don't care about pain anymore. Oh, we don't care about champions anymore. That's ridiculous, right? Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the reason why it's been so durable.
We'll speak about it later, because this is sort of some questions I had from my audience. Is it still relevant? But before we come to that point, why do we win? Why do we lose? And the third point was,
why do deals slip?
Why do deals slip? So why do we win? Why do we lose? Why do deals slip? Are three filter questions that actually, or the origins of MEDDIC are those three questions. So that would mean for me that every company, every sales team could go back to those three questions and create its own MEDDIC.
Love it. 1,000%. I totally agree. Yeah. And I've always said that when you're adopting this or you're implementing this, the most important thing is that you make it your own, right? It has to be yours. And so, I'm at Cloudera. We've come up with our own sort of variant on that. We added an extra C for compelling event, right? Which is a great point, right?
3 C's?
Yes. Right? Okay. So maybe we should call it C cubed. I don't know. But the point is that you have to make it your own. Okay. And so I love your comment, right? Is that sales leadership teams could essentially recreate the original exercise. Yeah. And then they could make a decision as to whether or not, they want to use MEDDIC or MEDDPICC or, with 2 C's or 3 C's, right? It's really up to you. I think that maybe the pendulum might swing back at some point, because I think I've seen some versions that are like, a little bit excessive. The reality is that the original version, covers all your bases. You can sort of say, well, the compelling event is sort of embedded, right? The competition is sort of omnipresent across the original version, right? You don't necessarily need to call that out. Paper process is actually embedded in decision process, right? It's sort of a sub-bullet. So again, it really depends on how do you want to emphasize it? How do you want to be able to, articulate this to your organization, and what can you adopt?
Yeah. So you could have actually coined a framework that asks, why do we win, why do we lose, and why do deals slip? I think you can use this for deal reviews, for forecasting calls, for creating your own methodology. But still, MEDDIC today is one of the most widely used frameworks out there.
And I've said this to many teams, is like, I would love for you to do this exercise. And then if you come up with something different than MEDDIC, call me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that, if you're selling in a complex environment, if you have a complex solution with a complex decision process, right, you're going to come up with something that looks a whole lot like this thing that's been in use.
Very similar, maybe different abbreviations, different letters, but probably in the core, the essence would be the same, because the anatomy of a deal that is successful is the same. Now, it's interesting to think about and discuss also, why do you think that MEDDIC became so proliferated and so widespread? What makes it like a qualification methodology that started like in a, maybe it's a stupid term, like in a garage, right? You were not thinking around, we need to create a methodology. It was like a coincidental discovery, and it spread through the ranks of VPs and SVPs to a globally applied sales framework. Why do you think is MEDDIC such a framework that is used everywhere by everyone? What made it so successful?
I think it's a few things. Number one is it works.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of those sales leaders and all of those salespeople that had great success with it at PTC, went on to have very successful careers. The best implementers and adopters of it were the most successful people. And so those sales leaders took it with them, and then they became CROs, and they became VPs of sales at new companies, well-funded companies. They brought it with them. Every single one of them took it with them and were able to, implement it and drive the adoption. And the reality is that because it's so simple and clear and has such high utility, right, that you can use it before, you use it before every sales call. You use it after every sales call to evaluate your gaps. As a sales leader, you can use it to sort of evaluate your team's competencies, right? So you have all these great ways of utilizing it that it becomes, like I said earlier, kind of the Swiss Army knife. And so, I think the value is obviously there. They're having success with it. So here's another important reason, is that in addition to being a very good qualification framework, that you said it earlier, it works with any process, right? And so if you have an 8-step process like we had at PTC, right, you can essentially layer MEDDIC, across those stages to make sure that your deals are progressing as you're expecting, right? When you look at things like the challenger sale, right? MEDDIC loves the challenger, right? The challenger is, if you think of MEDDIC as sort of the what, right? There's two things that are happening in parallel here, right? There are the things that you must accomplish, right? That's the what you must accomplish through a sales cycle in order to win. The next question is the how to, right? What are the sequence of activities, right? Am I going to do a discovery workshop? Am I going to do a solutioning workshop? Am I going to do a POC or a POV? Am I going to, what are those series of activities that I'm going to run? And then it's the marriage of those two things, right? It's the marriage of those two things. So the question is, like, what is it that I need to accomplish during my discovery workshop that would justify the continued investment by my company to proceed and commit the additional resources to doing a solution workshop, right? Like, that's a very important question that we have to answer. And so giving people the ability to sort of qualify in and qualify out, really important. So it's that I would say it's that adaptability and it's that utility, right? That the basic elements of what would cause a person to make a complex, difficult, disruptive decision into their organization, right? Those fundamental elements have not changed. Since I started, selling a complex solution. That's really an important thing to know, is that PTC was selling a very complex solution, very disruptive, right? We were selling a solution we were showing 3D CAD CAM to guys that were still doing 2D drafting, right? It was like showing fire to the caveman.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were like, well, wow, we don't want to change. Like, I'm a really good draftsman. Right. So now it's political, right? Now you've got to get to the people who care about getting products to market, right? You got to care about people who care about quality, right? And so now it's like you've got a multifaceted, multidimensional sales cycle, and you're trying to meet the needs of all the different stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah, you said so many things right now. You said so many things. You said the adaptability. And before we started recording, we were speaking about, is MEDDIC still relevant today? And obviously, I mean, both our opinion is it is still relevant today. But the adaptability creates the biggest potential for criticism, because if people start using MEDDIC that have not learned it from a master, someone that has actually applied MEDDIC, but maybe they read a few blog articles, they watch a YouTube video, and then they slam it into the CRM, and all of a sudden they think they're using MEDDIC, and then they found out, it's not working, it's too complex, people are not using it, then they stop using it, and they say, hey, MEDDIC is not working. And why adaptability is the biggest issue here, because the adaptability makes it to a makes it the Swiss Army knife, but at the same time, you need to adapt MEDDIC to your product, to your sales process, to actually make it work.
That's right.
And people think that if you use MEDDIC, or MEDDIC is the same for every company, for every product, but it's a different MEDDIC for a different industry and for a different sales process. So if we speak around the relevancy of MEDDIC, a lot of my big parts of my audience on LinkedIn, on YouTube, they say, hey, you need to ask Dick what he thinks around if MEDDIC is really still a relevant sales methodology, because the world has changed, sales has changed, customers are buying differently, the customer buying cycle has changed. We went away from perpetual licenses to SaaS models and cloud. So there must be a new methodology. MEDDIC must be outdated. So what's the next best thing? What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I would say that it is every bit as relevant today as it was in 1996, and it's because we're talking about, at the end of the day, it's a human being making a maybe partially emotional decision, but obviously the goal is to make an objective decision for your business, right? And at the end of the day, those things haven't changed. Now, one of the things that sales leaders have told me, many people have told me, is that when they've driven this adoption with MEDDIC into their sales organizations, one of the things that changes is they feel like there's a level of transparency that is, it's really a game changer for them and for the customer, right? So, my friend Jack Napoli always used to say, hey, listen, this could be a pleasurable experience or a painful one, right? So let's talk about, like, what would it take for us to navigate through a process? What's the value that you would need to receive, Mr. Customer, in order for you to make this kind of investment, right? Like, those are the kinds of conversations that, we can be proactive with. I think that, of course, people have more information today. They have, I think that oftentimes people like to think that buyers are much more informed, right? They're further down the sort of the evaluation process before they're willing to engage with sales. I think of it like this. As you're receiving an opportunity, right? I receive an opportunity. It's like poker. I now have a hand of cards that I have to play, right? It's like, okay, what do I have?
Yeah.
Do I have a champion? Do I have favorable decision criteria? Do I have executive access? Like, what are the things that I have and what don't I have? And now I need to make an informed decision as to whether or not this is an opportunity that I need to be investing in, right? Yeah. So I think that those things have not changed. Of course, you have to look at things like, AI is going to change the way that people do research, right? But it happens on both sides of the coin, right? The customer can do research. They can analyze, let's talk about my previous company, Celonis. Incredible capabilities to analyze like business processes and identify where bottlenecks are occurring in your process. And now you've got to figure out, okay, how do I solve that problem, right? Machine learning, do I need more headcount? Do I need, what is it that I need to solve that bottleneck? But in terms of we have those same capabilities on the solutioning side, right? We're now better informed about the problems and challenges that customers are facing. There's incredible solutions out there that now give us the ability to analyze businesses' performance, right? We can compare the metrics of our target company against the performance of their peers. And I can now have a conversation with the CFO. I can have an outreach to the CFO that says, hey, I know that you mentioned on your last earnings announcement that this KPI was a priority for you. We've helped several of your peers address that KPI through the solutions that we provide. Would you be interested in learning more?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's compelling and that's value. And that's the kind of engagement that senior business decision makers are looking to make. So I think that, for all those reasons, it's extremely relevant. The thing that will continue to change is the how-to, right? What are the tools that are available to us? What's the right sequence of events? What's the right way for us to initiate engagement with our customers? Maybe just say a quick word about that. Look, the world is getting more complex, right? Solutions are getting more complex, but I don't know that the talent pool is necessarily improving a lot, right? And so there almost seems to be a chasm between the complexity of the solutions that are available and the capabilities of organizations to ingest those, right?
Yeah.
That's a challenge. Yeah. So this means that as sales organizations, right, we need to bring better ideas, better solutions. And so, for my current organization, Cloudera, I mean, very exciting what we're doing in terms of helping companies to really leverage their data to drive AI solutions. But we need to work with our partners, right? Because we've got to work with partners so that we can approach our customers and our prospects with ideas that have somewhat been vetted, right? And so again, we have partners that one of the beauties of MEDDIC is that we have many, many partners that are using, some of our most strategic partners are using MEDDIC. So now we have a common language that we're talking about internally that we can talk about with our partners, right? To make sure that we have the right ideas and the right objectives going into every meeting. The other thing is, this may be kind of a funny little bit of a side anecdote, but that, you could literally present, if I was to have a procurement person from the customer and they were to say to me, hey, could you describe to me kind of the approach that you take in selling and what are sort of your guiding principles? I would walk them through MEDDIC and I would say, let me explain to you sort of the guiding principles for how we like to engage with our customers, right? We want to identify compelling pain and the problems that really matter to your business. We want to work with your key stakeholders to define your requirements. We want to make sure that those requirements align with the priorities of your executives. And we want to make sure that we navigate through a process that makes sense for everybody involved. And then we want to make sure that we're developing people internally that want this to succeed. Yeah. How does that sound to you, Mr. Procurement Executive? I think every single procurement person would say, well, that sounds like a great approach. And maybe you should teach that to our other vendors.
That reminds me of a quote I heard from you in a different podcast interview. You mentioned something around that good salespeople are good storytellers, and MEDDIC helps them to tell a good story. So the one frame and one perspective to see MEDDIC is to see it as a storytelling tool.
That's right.
To tell a really good business story.
That's right.
Can you give a perspective
on that?
Love that.
Yeah. And it starts with, and a story starts with kind of an idea, right? And so I think you and I are both fans of sort of the value pyramid, right? Well, that's a framework for storytelling, right? It's like, okay, well, that value pyramid can start with a value, call it a value hypothesis, right? It's like we've done our homework. We understand sort of the challenges of your industry and, and understand the key business objectives of your business. We've got some ideas as to how we can help you. Here are some examples of where we've done it before, right? So that kind of whole framework can be framed out by MEDDIC. And then what ends up happening is that value story sort of evolves, right? It transforms from sort of a hypothesis, like, hey, we have this idea, to, hey, look, this thing needs to be refined. Like we know that there's sort of something there, but it really needs to be refined. And then eventually it becomes sort of the story that your champion is telling to the executives. It's like, this is why we decided that we wanted to partner with Cloudera or Mongo. It's like they have some really compelling differentiators. They're addressing our requirements, and then eventually that story and that value pyramid gets handed off to delivery, right? So you want to be able to pass that to the people that ultimately have to deliver the story, right? Because we always talk about champions, right? And we have to develop champions. But I would actually like to think that, and we've had a lot of discussion and are really starting to leverage MEDDIC post-sale, right? Because it's not just a transaction, right? It's really a life cycle.
Yeah.
And so we really think of MEDDIC as not just something that we're using to get the deal, right? But that we want to transform our champions into heroes, right? Like when your champion is helping to drive the relationship, and then it gets driven into implementation and success management, and all those good things happen, and we're maintaining that executive level relationship, and we're fulfilling the decision criteria, and now our decision process becomes a delivery process, right? So the D still works,
exactly,
right? We're mitigating the pain, right? And we're measuring, right? All of the things that we said we were going to do, right? We're actually making that happen.
Yeah.
And so I love to think about this idea that, of course it's a life cycle. And so, it really should be something that is driving not just the initial deal, but really all the way through to the ultimate value delivery.
Yeah. It reminds me of what John McMahon just 2 days in Florida ago said. He said that it might be that the way how companies buy has changed, but how decisions are done and what drives a good deal and what classifies a good deal is the same like it was 30 years ago, right? And you mentioned also one interesting point. You mentioned that MEDDIC originates from a time where you were selling a very disruptive technology.
That's right.
You were selling a 3D CAD. What's the abbreviation for CAD? It's
CAD/CAM.
Yeah, it's
computer-aided design.
Computer-aided design. You were selling computer-aided design to people that were really were sketching out plans with a pen and paper, right?
That's right.
So for them, it was extremely disruptive. Today, we have other disruptive technologies, but just to remind ourselves that MEDDIC was designed to sell a technology that is disruptive.
That's right.
Means it's still relevant for a market environment like it is today, where we're still selling disruptive technology on a different level. So it must be relevant.
If you're selling a commodity, okay, and there's nothing wrong with selling a commodity. You can make a very good living, selling commodities. I have a friend that has a very successful business, and all he sells is concrete. Okay, but that's about price and delivery, and quality. And so go use BANT.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to sell sand or whatever concrete, you can use BANT, exactly. Let's speak quickly about also enablement, and let's speak about training of MEDDIC, because I feel that if you start a company from scratch, or if you build a new team within a company from scratch, it's easier to implement MEDDIC because it becomes the standard of behavior from the get-go.
Yes.
But a lot of companies, especially where I'm from, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, they are 10 years old, 5 years old. They have 1,000, 2,000 employees, and they never use the qualification methodology. And now they say, we want to start using this MEDDIC thing now. So we have it now in our sales force. And then they wonder that it is not working. It's because implementing MEDDIC while the car is driving, it's like changing cars on a driving, changing tires on a driving car. Yeah. Do you think can it work to implement MEDDIC afterwards?
Yes, absolutely.
And how to do it then?
So I have a couple of thoughts here. One is there are organizations out there, small organizations, maybe let's say small organizations, where we have a team of very experienced sales reps, and maybe they don't really need a lot of support. They don't need a lot of resources. And in that case, you might just decide to say, hey, listen, I don't care how you guys sell. I don't care, what your process is. All I care is that you make your number. And so if you don't make your number, then, you're not going to have a job. So go get them, right? And that's an option. That's a viable option, right? But if you're building a scalable sales organization, right? You want to scale your sales organization. And sometimes what happens is that in the early days, right, you bring in the rainmakers. Yeah. So you've got rainmakers and you're like, hey guys, go just figure out how to make it happen. Like, go sell. We're going to give you all the support and resources that you need. But at some point, you have to be scalable, right? If you want to grow your business. So you have to be efficient. You have to have, and this is where the process comes in. Yeah. It's like, look, guys, you can't just burn through our company's resources. We have limited resources. And so we want to make sure that we're executing, that we're qualifying, that we're conducting very effective discovery, and then we're going to make an evaluation as to whether or not we should keep going. Like, is this a good fit? Like, do they like us? Are they interested in the things that we do differently and better than our competition? Because if they are, then we should continue on and do solutioning or, go to a proposal or whatever we need to do, right? That makes sense. So in those environments, right, like, you need to have a common language. You need to have, some process and methodology around things, right? The other thing is that I would say that maybe there are times when you can go into an existing organization, and you could take me into any successful sales organization or not successful. Actually, either, it doesn't matter. But anybody that's sold anything in that company, you have to. So I'll come interview you if you've sold something. Yeah. We'll have a conversation about what you sold and how you sold it. Okay. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to say, well, I had a conversation with this guy, and he told me that the reason he won that deal was because we had the best price, and we had the best solution, and we were able to deliver it. And this person over here is going to tell me, and so I'm going to go through this series of interviews, and eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to recreate MEDDIC, right? Because all the reasons,
why do we win? Why do we lose?
And all the reasons why they won, right? And it's not necessarily to say that every person addressed every element of it, right? I'll tell you another quick story. Is that I was involved in a big sales meeting, and part of the sales meeting was that we invited the top 5 salespeople, onto the stage, and we said, and they all basically provided some explanation as to why they were successful in reference to MEDDIC. And one of them said, well, the reason I was successful was because I think I did a really good job of developing champions, really strong champions that helped me get access to executives. The next person was like, well, I think I really understand the competition, and I was able to really differentiate our solution. And so we went through the whole thing, and we're like, well, here you go. Here's 5 people who all made President's Club. They were 150 or 200% a plan. And yet each of them recognized that there were things that they could do better than they were doing them, right? Like, it's like the champion guy was like, oh my gosh, like, I could learn from you. If I was as good at competition as you were, I'd go from 150% a plan to 250% a plan, right? And so essentially being able to, leverage the good things that organizations are doing, like why we win, right? It's really, a lot of times when you're selling and educating people on MEDDIC, it's not necessarily, hey, we're introducing this new thing to you. What we're doing is we're providing you with a vernacular, right? We're providing you with clarity of language to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, because the reality is that good salespeople are already doing most of these things, most, if not all of these things, right? So I think that makes it is a very practical way, I think, to make people understand that this isn't something necessarily new. What we're asking you to do is to sort of adopt this new way of thinking about it and a new framework, because it makes it really easy for you to identify gaps.
Yes.
Like, where are the gaps? Now, the other thing I'll say about this is that one of the best ways to implement this, I think, is to establish what I call a point of inspection. Right? And you can establish this at any company, any critical. The point of inspection needs to occur prior to your company committing significant resources, right? So we establish a point of inspection before we do the POC, right? And it's like, if you want the resources to do a POC, you got to show me that you have your ducks in a row, right? Like, do you have we identified the metric that the customer needs to see? Do we know what the success criteria is? Do you have a champion? Et cetera, right? And so once you establish that formal point of inspection, what it does is it gives you the ability it creates instant coaching opportunity. Yeah. Because now, as a manager, I'm now identifying the fact that, hey, I have a sales rep here that's done a lot of good work, but he's got a couple of gaps. Yeah. And he probably needs to get better at this or that, right? Yes. And so now you're really making better decisions, and also, clearly identifying the risk. Right, so you're saying, okay, well, we haven't gotten to the economic buyer yet. So do we want to? It's identified as a risk. It's a gap. Now we're making an informed decision as to whether or not we want to continue, because we believe we can get to the economic buyer if we do X or Y, right? But at least you're doing that with your eyes wide open, and by doing this, right, we when I was at Celonis, we did a very interesting experiment. We actually figured out that when we had executive sponsorship, our forecast accuracy was 10x more accurate within the forecasted time period. And so then we were like, well, executive sponsorship seems really important. Yeah. So how do we get more executive sponsorship? And we figured out, we sort of worked backwards. And we figured out that it was directly related to the quality of our discovery. That when we had high quality discovery, we were developing strong champions, and strong champions were getting us access to the executives. So we're like, okay, so if we put our energy and effort into better discovery, that was a smart investment, and it paid off.
You know what struck me during this conversation so far? How often deals are lost not because of product or price, but because something critical was missed in the conversation. And that's exactly where tools like Kickscale come in. Kickscale uses AI to record, transcribe and analyze your sales meetings and shows you what really happened. What parts of MEDDIC were covered? Where did qualification fall short? And which questions should you ask next time? It even syncs with your CRM and gives your reps real-time coaching, so you don't just review calls, you actually get better with everyone. And the results speak for themselves. Teams using Kickscale see up to 27% higher win rates just by closing the gaps that are hiding behind plain sight. As a listener and viewer of the show, you get an extended free version with 20 recorded meetings absolutely for free. Check out the link in the show notes and get your access to Kickscale today. Let's get back to the episode.
You mentioned before that salespeople can use MEDDIC and teams can use MEDDIC to coach each other and to find out the blind spots in their own skills.
That's right.
And we have those 4 levels of competency, right? So first I'm unconsciously incompetent, and I'm consciously incompetent, and I'm consciously competent, and then I'm unconsciously competent. I'm doing it without thinking about it, like driving a car, stick shift, looking in the mirror and doing everything simultaneously. And excellent salespeople that have this natural kind of innate ability to be just great at sales.
That's right.
They do things the right way,
without
knowing that they are doing it a certain right way, and it's hard for them to replicate that success. Right. And MEDDIC is giving you let's put it like that, a framework to make it applicable for everyone else, to model excellence. Yeah. To take what works and model excellence for everyone else.
So let me just interrupt for a second. Think about a pilot that's been flying for 25 years, right? I've been flying for 25 years. Okay, I've got an innate ability to know sort of how to make sure that we have a safe flight. But guess what? That pilot for 25 years has had a pre-flight check. Okay, so I'm sort of poking a little bit of fun at sort of the unconsciously competent, right? Because the reality is that when you have this much complexity going on, right? Like I would basically really try to shy away from sort of saying, hey, you don't want to have a checklist. You don't want to make sure that you haven't missed anything, right? And so it is that it's like I love the idea of people having that unconscious competence, but at the same time you have to match that up with a health check.
Yes.
Right? A way to make sure that you haven't missed anything, right? Because it's the things that oftentimes the things that you're really good at, right? Over time, those things can actually eventually become your weaknesses, right? And so people evolve, and so you got to make sure that you stay on top of your game, right? Yes. Like I think about, I love golf, and I remember, Jack Nicklaus saying that at the beginning of every golf season, he would start by making sure that he was holding the golf club correctly. like it starts with the grip, right? Like what's more fundamental than that, right? And so we're talking about fundamentals and making sure that we don't lose sight of those.
Yeah. And you also mentioned before something like, we need an inspection point.
Point of inspection, that's right.
Point of inspection needs to get inspected. People in general don't like to be inspected, right? It's a word that people shy away.
Maybe call it something different.
It doesn't sound that sexy to me if you say I'm getting inspected. But let's call it the inspector in that inspection point.
Checkpoint, we'll call it a checkpoint.
The checkpoint, the person that is doing the checkpoint must be a person that has learned MEDDIC from someone else who has mastered it. Because if you start, let's say I'm a company, I'm starting to use MEDDIC, and I'm doing this inspection or checkpoint, whatever. It must be done by someone that knows how to do the what and the how, that has actually applied MEDDIC out there in the field, has learned it from either from you, from John, from Jack.
That's right. I think you accumulate that over time, but I also think that you can make it very easy for them.
Yeah,
I can make it very easy for any sales manager, and I've become a big fan of MEDDIC scoring. right? So having a basic scoring framework that allows you to sort of overlay the scoring with sales stages, right? So let's just take a simple example, economic buyer, okay? Well, we use a scale of 0 to 3. So it's like 0, I don't know who the economic buyer is. 1, I know who the economic buyer is. 2 is that we've met with the economic buyer and the economic buyer is sponsoring our engagement. And 3 is that the economic buyer supports us, right? So at what point in my sales cycle do I need to clearly identify who the economic buyer is and be able to confirm that they know who we are? Okay. And at what point in the sales cycle do I need to actually meet the economic buyer? And at what point do I need to actually make sure that I have the support of the economic buyer to continue, right? Like you can do that with every single element of MEDDIC, and you can define a score. So we've defined that kind of framework, and we say that by the end of discovery, you should have a MEDDIC score of 9, right? We use MEDDPICC. You should have a MEDDPICC score of 9, and so at that point, you're then able to make an objective decision as to whether or not you're willing to, whether you feel like you have things in order such that you can confidently commit the resources to continue, or if you have a level of risk that is making you say, hey, gee, maybe this isn't as good a sales cycle as we thought it was. We're not really getting what we need from our customer or prospect. And now it's an opportunity for you to approach the customer and say, gee, we feel like this isn't really going as well as we had hoped. Maybe it's not a good time. We can either regroup, next month, next quarter, next year. And the prospect is going to say one of two things, right? They're either going to say, you're right. We're distracted. We've got some other things going on. Or they're going to say, don't go. We really want to move forward. We like where this is going. We recognize that we need to be more committed to the process, and we're ready to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as my friend Andy White says, nobody ever regrets qualifying out, right?
Exactly.
And he's absolutely right.
Yeah. And how many salespeople are doing it actually? Like no one is qualifying out. Everyone is holding on to his fantasy pipeline.
That's right.
And really having the guts to go out and say, hey, dear customer, we think based on this and this observation, I think it doesn't make sense to speak right now. Maybe we should regroup next year. What do you think about it? And if the customer says, no, please stay, we need you, all of a sudden you turn the tables and now you are in the stronger position because the customer needs to defend his idea.
That's right.
And you build up massive urgency in the sales process. And if not, you know that it was an opportunity that's not worth holding on to.
Absolutely right. And we're really talking about what we're really talking about here is pipeline health. You know what I mean? I think that if you were to talk to a lot of CROs or sales leaders and you would say, how healthy is your pipeline? And they'd say, well, I have a 4X pipeline. And I would say, I didn't ask you how big your pipeline is. I am asking you how healthy your pipeline is, because they're very different things, right? You can have a 4X pipeline that's full of crap, right? Or you can have a 2.5X pipeline that's very healthy, right? Sort of take your choice. But I would much rather have an accurate picture of reality, right? And I know that, there are sales leaders that do things, to try to drive a sense of urgency in terms of pipeline. This raises an important point, which is that so many sales leaders focus on the forecast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And which can sometimes drive bad behavior in terms of people trying to put lipstick on a pig, as they say, right? That's a mistake. So there needs to be more effort placed on the health of the pipeline.
Yeah.
And, I'm a big believer that every account executive should have a pipe gen plan. What is your pipe gen plan, right? What's your quota? What's your done number, right? What's your pipeline? What's the gap? And what's your plan to close the gap, right? If you have a pipe plan, then, that is your plan to leverage the resources of the company, to work with field marketing, to work with your BDRs, to do whatever you need to do to figure out how to address that pipeline. But if you're not really using this MEDDPICC scoring and you're not mapping that to your sales stages, then you don't really have an accurate picture as to where these deals are, right? And this then results in, for a sales leader, right? It gives you the ability to actually generate we'll call it a weighted forecast, right? Look at your weighted forecast. How much of our stuff is in discovery? How much of our stuff is in solutioning? How much of our stuff is in proof? If I have a consistent method of execution that moves these deals through, then I can more accurately measure conversion rates. I can more accurately, predict the health of my pipeline, not only in the current quarter, but I also begin to get a much better line of sight into how I'm looking for my out quarters.
Exactly. That's it. Because, and at the end of the day, it's all about, you mentioned before, it's about compare. You can compare salespeople with it,
That's
and
right.
you can scale organizations.
That's right.
Until you don't have a vocabulary, a common standard of vocabulary. What is a champion?
That's right.
What does it mean to get to an economic buyer? What is a metric? What is indicated pain, implicated pain? You cannot compare the performance of salespeople, and you cannot scale your organization. You cannot scale from 500 to 5,000 if everyone is reinventing the wheel himself.
That's
in
right.
each opportunity. So you need to have it.
I have a sort of a pyramid that I've used with CROs, sales leaders, that basically the top of the pyramid is, we'll call it a continuous improvement process, a process of continuous improvement. And the result of that process is that it's your organization becoming its best possible self. This is your organization becoming all it can be, right? And so in order for you to do that, right, you have to have a continuous improvement process. Below that are insights. You have to have insights. Like, you have to know, okay, well, look, you can't just throw more training at people, right? Like, you have to identify and address the problems.
Yeah.
In order for you to have insights, you have to have quality data, okay? And then below that is all the infrastructure, the sales tools, the CRM, right? Below that is a playbook, because now I have to have a playbook so that I can kind of have some level of repetition in terms of how we're executing.
Yeah.
And then the most fundamental thing below all of that is the common language. Because if you don't have the common language, you're not communicating clearly on what the playbook is. The data that you're generating is squishy, fuzzy, which means that you're not generating insights. Yeah. Like, there's so many companies that have massive amounts of data, but they have very little insight. And that's why, right? Fundamental, common language, disciplined execution playbook, infrastructure, data, insights, continuous improvement. Be all you can be.
That's a really good hierarchy to think about. Let's go one step back to what I asked you before about implementing MEDDIC.
Yes.
So someone that is now hearing the podcast, a sales leader or a sales rep, say, hey, I want to start using MEDDIC. I want to implement MEDDIC into my organization, into my team. And I see it more and more happening.
Yes.
Just with 2 or 3 customers I have in Germany that over the last 2 months, they implemented MEDDIC.
Yes.
Before we start recording as well, you mentioned it's a lot about also changing the behavior. It's not just slamming MEDDIC into the CRM and expect magic to happen, right? It always comes with changing the way how people behave, changing the way how they sell, maybe changing how they drive meetings, how they ask questions. So what would you do really on a tactical level?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you a couple of ideas. Number one, you have to learn what it is. You have to learn the fundamentals.
Yeah.
What is it, right? And I would really encourage people to, there's some really great content out there. Big fan of the work that Andy has done. But at the end of the day, you need to make it your own.
Yeah.
Right. So build on that fundamental stuff. Make it your own. The next thing is that you have to embed it. You have to embed it in your sales culture and in your sales process. So you need to use the language of MEDDIC in your deal reviews. You need to, if you're using MEDDIC scoring, like we are, right? MEDDIC scoring should be part of your deal reviews. If you are, if you've created templates for discovery workshops, if you have templates for solutioning workshops, if you have prerequisites for doing a POC or a POV, like, the language needs to be there. Right, so make it. It needs to be embedded. Right, I've been involved with companies that are like, oh yeah, this is our process, and then MEDDIC's over here. It's like, to me, I think that makes it much more difficult.
Yeah.
Right, you're sort of separating two things that really should be married. And so that marriage, and I coming back to the scoring really helps you to marry those things, right?
Yeah.
And so then again, back to the checkpoint, right? And making sure that your coaching reps, I really tend to put the emphasis when you're driving adoption. It really makes a lot of sense to drive the adoption in the initial stages, right? And of course, you can do deal reviews on late stage deals. That's all fine. But the reality is that when you really bring the discipline and the rigor to those early stages of discover and solution, prospect, discover, solution are sort of our initial stages, right? When you bring the discipline and the rigor there, what tends to happen is that your discipline and rigor early tends to perpetuate. Okay, if you're disciplined and rigorous early, that tends to perpetuate, right? If you're sloppy and cut corners early, that also tends to perpetuate, right? And so now you're sloppy and you're not really being as disciplined. You're not really using MEDDIC as a way to really set your goals and objectives. And what happens to those deals? You go through the whole sales cycle. You go through the whole whole sales cycle and you commit all kinds of company resources and POCs, and you do all these things, and guess what?
Yeah.
No deal, because you missed something really important. You didn't get to the economic buyer. You didn't influence the decision criteria, right? You didn't address the right problem, and so there was really no sense of urgency, right? The real pain wasn't there, right? And so it happens all the time, right? People burn company resources, they get to the end of the cycle, and it's no deal, right? I saw some report recently that was like, hey, the number of no decisions is going up.
Yeah.
Right? Well, how do you fix that? Front end of the process, like do a better job of qualifying so that you're spending your time wisely. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that really determines whether or not you're going to be successful as a sales rep, right?
Yeah.
Am I spending my time wisely? Am I spending my company's resources wisely? Like the best time to affect that is early in the process.
Yes.
Right?
I think even 60% of all deals that are not closing because the customer says, hey, we don't want to use it because nothing happens. So 60% of all not closed deals is no decision. And I think it happens because, like when you do a mistake at the beginning, you are building your house on a sandy ground.
That's right.
And that's why you need to do the right things at the beginning correctly.
Right. And I think it's funny. I'm going to maybe hit on something that's kind of an emotional thing for salespeople, is that of course they're hopeful and they're optimistic, right? And they want this lead to be real, right? And they would much rather work on a qualified good lead than prospect, right? I don't know too many people who love to prospect, but the reality is that when you take a very objective approach to really making decisions, and this is where managers, this is the benefit of managers leaning in on those early stages. It's like, I can lean into you and say, hey, look, you've had 5 meetings with this customer and we still don't know who the economic buyer is. Okay. We need to step back. Okay. And by the way, how much time are you spending prospecting this week?
Yeah. Where's your PG plan?
Yeah, right. Where's your pipe gen plan, right? So, that's where managers need to lean in and make sure, and that's really the benefit of focusing on those early stages, right? Yeah. Is that you're holding your reps accountable and making sure that they're not wasting company resources. Yeah. They're spending their time wisely, which means that guess what? Your pipeline's not so healthy, and you need to. And by the way, maybe you need to sharpen up your, pitch skills. Maybe you need to learn our product a little better. Maybe you need to, handle objections a little better. Like, what is it that's keeping you from, capturing the interest of your audience, right? Like your conversion rate from leads to prospects is below average. Yeah. Like, why is that?
I think that salespeople are very often very good in lying themselves.
Yes.
Because they try to confirm their assumptions in the qualification instead of find an antidote to their assumptions. So I think the best salespeople, they're trying to disqualify and be maniacal qualifiers, let's put it like that.
Yeah.
And trying to see where is the problem, or where is the potential question mark, where is the trap I'm still not seeing in that process.
Yes.
Versus the less effective salespeople, as far as like that. They try to confirm what they think is right, so they can, with a good gut feeling, put their opportunity into the next sales stage.
Yes. So, I love, that's such a great concept. But I think that one of the things that really drives that is credibility, right? So as a sales rep, if I do my homework, if I develop an interesting point of view and an interesting hypothesis that allows me to establish credibility very quickly with my prospect, then the game changes. It really changes, right? Because now I'm not viewed as desperate person who's trying to get into an account. I'm now viewed as a credible person that has an idea about how they can help my business and may be able to help me personally, right? And so in that situation now, your point, there's a saying, it's always believing, right? So it's sort of like, if I'm the guy that now says, hey, look, I'm not sure that we're progressing as well as we should be. Maybe this isn't the right time. That comment all of a sudden carries some real weight, right? As opposed to the person that didn't come prepared, and tries dropping that line, right?
Yeah.
That conversation might not go so well.
Yeah. And also I just imagine if you tell to a customer in a meeting, hey, Dick, I think, we're working on this for 6 months, and it seems to me that this and this is missing. And maybe I'm not sure if this is the right time to continue speaking. Maybe it's better if we maybe regroup in 1 year or something like that. It's a crazy pattern interrupt because no one is doing it. So if you go to a customer and tell the customer, hey, I think it's not the right time for you to do that, you all of a sudden, your authority goes up immensely. And the respect that the customer will have for you will go up immensely because no one is doing that. No one dares to walk away from the table. Right. That's like in good negotiation techniques.
Well, what they say is that a healthy pipeline cures all ills, right?
Yeah.
And so when you know your pipeline is healthy, all of a sudden you become a better qualifier, right? Because now all of a sudden you begin to really see the value of your time. As opposed to somebody that's kind of a little bit maybe worried about appearances. They're like, I just need to make sure that I look like I'm busy.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And so I've been there. Like, starting out, new, ramping up. I mean, it's hard, but it's like, that's the time when, I think making a transition, sort of going into a new opportunity, being in a new environment, don't forget, like, that discipline and that rigor still applies, and that's why there's so many people that over the years, they've taken it with them, right? And all those sales leaders that went on to PTC and, BMC and Blade Logic and all these other great companies that, really helped to proliferate MEDDIC, what's interesting is that as more and more of those sales leaders have said, as I'm building my team, I'm looking for people that have MEDDIC DNA, right? The people that have that background and that experience, because they know that that those people have developed, good sales hygiene. And so as a sales leader, if you come from that mindset, you're really helping yourself, right? When you're looking for that kind of talent coming in, right? It really makes the ramp up process quicker.
Yeah, so you need to have those right people in place that have the right MEDDIC DNA. But I would also say, and I'm curious about your perspective on that, in Germany there is a saying, in Germany we say, der Fisch fängt an vom Kopf zu stinken. That's German. In English it would mean something like, the fish starts stinking from the head.
Okay.
This means that in sales leadership and sales management, and management in general, it means that you as the sales manager are the core or the start of the problem.
Yes.
So if we speak about MEDDIC and you say, tomorrow we use MEDDIC. So read this and this article about MEDDIC. It's in the CRM, start using it.
Yeah.
But you as a sales leader are not proficient in the application of MEDDIC, it won't be working because the fish starts stinking from the head. So you as the sales leader need to be proficient in the application of MEDDIC so you can coach your sales reps, you can hold them accountable, you can do those right checkpoints, ask those right questions.
That's right.
So my suggestion would be, before you start using MEDDIC, you as the sales leader or the sales management team need to get help first, need to understand MEDDIC from you or someone that actually mastered it before your reps are using it.
But I would also say that in parallel to that, that you definitely need to make sure that you have collaboration and a strategy and a plan with sales operations, right? Because the way that you're reporting on this is critical, right? And again, I'm going to come back to the MEDDPICC scoring, right? Being able to, and we just do it in Salesforce, right? We're in Salesforce. We have a scoring framework there, and so the ability to have that means that even if I'm the CRO, I'm the senior leader of a large organization, I can get some level of visibility to the health of my pipeline because I know that the scoring is actually providing me with that insight.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that can help to address the issue that you're talking about. And then so that's sort of the you have to have sort of a holistic strategy that rolls all the way up to make sure that you're getting the support from senior leadership, but that at the end of the day it also comes down to the 3-foot conversations that happen between the manager and the rep. Yeah. Right. Because at the end of the day, the sales rep is responsible for accurately reporting on the status of their opportunity. And it's interesting. One of the things that I've found is that salespeople are generally very honest. Like they won't, sometimes they may be sort of overly optimistic, but if you have a sit down and a conversation with them about what is the reality of your situation with this account relative to MEDDIC, you will get honest answers, right? And the beauty of that is that once managers and reps start having those conversations, right? Those conversations shift from, hey, what's your gut tell you? Tell me, how do you feel about this opportunity, right? Like I still hear that today, right? It's like, how do you feel about it? Like, do you think it's going to happen? And it's like, okay, it's okay. You can have that conversation, but you also need to have the conversation that says, how come we haven't met the economic buyer yet, right?
Yeah.
How come we haven't really clearly defined like the paper process? Yeah. Like, do we understand what the compelling event is to know what's actually driving their sense of urgency? Like those are actually much more substantive conversations, right? And so, at the end of the day, right, we need the managers, like you said, to drive the accountability. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the 3-foot conversations, the accurate reporting of the status of the deal, because when you get the accurate reporting, now you get visibility. So what's working, what's not working, and then you can, and then as an enablement leader, right? That's gold. Yeah. Because if I can see what's really happening out there and where the gaps are, now I've got something to work with. I can take action.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of one thing. I think I heard it even from John, or it wasn't it maybe Andy even. He said that the lengthier the explanation of a sales rep about an opportunity is, the less likely I believe it will actually close.
Interesting. Okay.
So when a sales rep tells me, yeah, we had such a nice conversation and I think the customer really liked what I showed him. And yesterday we went to dinner and we had a beer and we spoke about his wife and golf and blah, blah, blah. Instead of, this is the pain. This is the impact of the pain. This is the negative consequences. Yep. This is the champion. This is why they need to buy now. This opportunity will come in.
That's right.
More likely than an opportunity where you just you tell stories how nice it was with the customer to sit together and how much you like him or how much he likes you or she, whatever. So I think that's also a good frame or qualification methodology to see how much substance is there.
I think one nice little, call it a litmus test for any manager is how clearly can your champion articulate why Cloudera? Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And so if they can tell that story, if you've developed your champion to the point where they can clearly articulate why they believe our solution is the best, why do they believe in you, why do they believe in our company, and why do they believe in our solution? If you have developed a champion to the point where they can clearly articulate that, then that's a good test that you've done a good part of your job correctly.
Thanks for saying that, because that's actually one point why MEDDIC is misused that often and why people say, hey, MEDDIC is outdated or MEDDIC doesn't work. Because let's speak about champions, champion building. The C in MEDDIC, one of the C's in MEDDIC stands for champions, right? Now, most people that are not proficient in MEDDIC, or they maybe just read a blog article or seen a YouTube video, they think they need to find the champion. They need to find the champion. So he basically, just falls off the heaven, and all of a sudden he is here. But you cannot find a champion. You can only find a potential champion, and then you need to have the right strategy to build the champion. Now, MEDDIC the acronym is not saying or explaining how to build and develop the champion. MEDDIC is just saying, hey, you need a champion. But the way to get there, it's a complete different story where you can write a book about champion building.
That's right.
So, and that's why there is a lot of intangible knowledge around how to apply MEDDIC that the letters alone won't tell you.
That's right.
So I think what you need to have is that in-depth knowledge that, okay, it's C stands for champion, but you cannot find a champion, you need to find a potential champion, and you need to build the champion with tools like 3 Whys that answer the questions, why the customer need to do anything, why they need to do it with us, and why they need to do it now. You need to have the champion building plan, you need to research the person, find a strategy to meet with the person, you know, like the actual application. It's
here's a thought. And obviously, you know, what I'm going to say is easier said than done, but imagine clearly identifying, developing a value hypothesis, right? We have a very interesting idea about a compelling opportunity that we believe we can deliver to this company based on past experience, based on the research we've done. We have intelligence. We've maybe even done a little bit of discovery and have identified some of the current solutions that are in place and maybe some of the challenges that they're facing. So we've done our homework. We have some ideas. And now we're thinking, okay, we could identify most likely the person who we believe would be the economic buyer. If they were to buy our solution based on this value hypothesis, who would be the economic buyer, okay? And so then we can send that economic buyer an introductory letter and we can say, we have an idea as to how we're gonna help you, okay? And the economic buyer may or may not respond, right? But we've done that. We've done that outreach. We've made an attempt to connect with a decision maker. Okay, so this is kind of I'm working backwards now, right? Now I get to think about, okay, well, who are the people who that economic buyer trusts? Who are the people that report to that economic buyer that would be most interested in the potential value that we could deliver to them or their boss, right? So there you go. Now I'm thinking, okay, how do I get to those individuals? Because those are the people who, at the end of the day, could carry the message to the economic buyer, right? And so now my message to that potential champion is, hey, I wanted to reach out to you because we've been in contact with your CFO or the executive, and we're actually preparing, an initial hypothesis around a potential solution that we have for your business.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in having a conversation about this? So how do you think as that individual that might get your attention, right? So these guys have a strategic idea. You're sounding very consultative, and this sounds like an opportunity for me to potentially deliver value to my boss. So if you approach it from that perspective, I'm working backwards and I'm actually identifying people who really, really could be champions.
Yeah.
And you might have to work back another layer, right? Like depending on how big your solution is, you might be working at EB -2, right? But you're working backwards and you're getting to credible people who can get you to the people who can ultimately be developed into strong champions, who can get you to the economic buyer. And this hits on one of the things that's really important, is that definitions matter. Okay, and so you have to be very clear when you say, what is the definition of a champion? We have to be clear. You cannot be vague about this, right? The definition that we use is, that an economic buyer is a credible person with influence that has access to the economic buyer, that has a vested interest in your
champion. Champion
has access to the economic buyer, and they have a vested interest in your solution. Yeah. And they're selling for you when you're not there.
Exactly. You're selling for you if you're not there because you need that, because
that's right.
Complex sales, you cannot sell yourself.
Right. And so you cannot be, this is where the clarity of the language is really important, right? And it comes back to that pyramid. It's like if your definitions are not clear, then your playbook's not clear, then your data's not clear, then your data's fuzzy, right? Your insights, you have no insights.
Yeah. There's one last topic I would like to ask you. I think I came up with the question yesterday when I was sitting on a plane from Miami to Philadelphia to meet you today. And today, before we start recording, you said that there've been a lot of people involved in the proliferation of MEDDIC and how MEDDIC came about to be that methodology it is today. There was Jack, John, there's you. But you actually coined the term MEDDIC. So you selected the letters and you created what it's called MEDDIC today.
That's right.
If you would need to start from scratch today there is no MEDDIC in place, and you would need to redo the whole process, and you would need to relabel the whole thing, what would be the thing that you would do differently if you would do anything differently?
I don't think I would do anything differently, although I think if I was to do it with my current employer, and I was to say, hey, let's redo the original exercise, right? Yeah. Why do we win? Why do we lose? And why do deals slip? To me, we might come up with something a little bit different, but not much.
Yeah.
Right. And I would encourage any sales team or sales leader to do that exercise. And if you come up with something that looks a lot different, call me. Okay. Yeah. I'd love to hear about it. I've never had a strong emotional attachment to, hey, I like the original version.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a little bit. But whether it's, 2 C's or a P or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't really matter to me very much. The thing that really matters to me is that the organization that's implementing it embraces it.
Yeah.
That they call it their
MEDDIC.
It's their MEDDIC. It's like, this is our version, right? Because only then can you really embrace it, and can you really, embed it and make it part of, your sales culture. So I don't think I would really, I think that the, kind of the original approach was really solid. And I think, really important is that the goal is to try to keep it as simple as you can, right? Of course, it's always easy to make things more complex.
Yeah.
The challenge is sometimes keeping it simple.
Exactly.
And so how do you keep it simple? Because simplicity really is a very important part of driving adoption.
One thing that keeps coming up in this conversation, and honestly in every high-performing sales org, is the need for a structured and repeatable system. Most deals don't fall through because of the product. They fall through because we missed something critical. We didn't quantify the pain, we never reached the real economic buyer, and we thought we had a champion, but we didn't. Why? Because there's no scalable sales system in place. And that's exactly what I train sales teams on with the software sales formula, on structured frameworks like MEDDIC and Discovery, not just to tick the boxes in a CRM, but to understand how to run a deal in the right way, from discovery with systems to close with clarity and control. If you want your team to stop losing deals they should be winning, then check out softwaresalesformula.com. It's softwaresalesformula.com, or check out the link down below in the show notes. And now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, and complexity is the enemy of execution. If you want to implement anything, we need to have it as simple as possible. People hate complexity, they love simplicity. Right. Enablement, sales enablement. You have a big passion for also training salespeople, coming up with sales curricula, sales training concepts.
That's right.
The biggest issue I see with sales trainings, especially if you hire a sales trainer from the outside, the sales trainer comes in, you have 1 or 2 days of sales training. Maybe you spread it over 2 weeks. You have maybe 2-3 hours online each day or every second day. And then the hardest part is to actually, transfer all that knowledge into reality and make this change of behavior happen. 80-90% of all the knowledge in a sales training just evaporates within 1, 2, 3 weeks. Yeah. And sales trainings are more like an inspirational one-time event than really something that moves the needle.
So I definitely have a strong opinion about that.
Please.
So, look, I'm not opposed to external sources. There are some great subject matter experts out there. I have a personal friend of mine who is absolutely a pro at executive engagement.
Yeah.
The guy has built a really great business helping organizations to understand how to help their sales organizations effectively engage with senior executives. What a powerful, great, area of expertise that he brings, and he brings tremendous value to companies. But as a sales enablement leader, in order for you to enter my organization, I have some requirements, right? Like, you have to use my language.
Yeah.
You have to understand my process, and you have to understand specifically what part of my process are you trying to impact, right? Because then we can actually take your great ideas, your great content, and we can incorporate, right, your fundamentals. So I would never, ever subscribe to having somebody fly in and fly out, and it's like, hey, thanks for having me, right? Like, that is a waste of everybody's time and effort, right? So you have to have your common language. You have to have your playbook, right? You have to have your resources. And then anything that comes in, this kind of expertise has to be, you have to have an eye towards how how do I leverage this great experience, this great talent, these great ideas? How do I incorporate that? How do I embed it? How do I make it available to our team?
But how would you structure such a training then? I mean, would you say, hey, okay, let's say that the sales trainings person, he or she knows your sales process.
Yeah.
He knows which part of the process he wants to impact with which methodologies.
Yeah.
All clear. But how would you structure a curriculum so it actually gets also applied in the actual sales process?
So we did something. I did something like this, a couple of years ago, where we brought in this individual expert at executive engagement, and what we did is we actually had pre-work. So I'm a big fan of pre-work.
Yeah.
Right. Smarter on arrival. We do pre-work before our sales kickoff. So pre-work means that you're coming to the event with a fundamental understanding of what we're going to be talking about. You also are coming to the event with a couple of accounts where you've actually already done some initial research, right? And there are some expectations that are had, and so that it can be sort of an educational session, but there's also a bit of a workshop environment where, there might even be some role playing.
Yes.
Role playing, I wish we had more time, to talk about how companies are going to be able to use AI to certify salespeople through role play activities. That's a game changer. It's one of the most exciting things that I'm most excited about as a sales enablement leader is how do you help your sales team level up more quickly? And it's through, I don't know if you know baseball, like in baseball, right? They have this thing called the batting cage.
Yeah.
So you go to the batting cage because you get to get practice swings before the baseball game, right? Well, it's like time in the batting cage. Right. So, but anyway, this idea of role playing and being able to apply these key concepts, but then you also have to make sure that from an execution standpoint that you're incorporating their content, like that you've got those resources available, right? That they're now available for the sales team, that the sales team knows how to find those resources, and that those maybe some new principles or ideas about how we should be engaging with executives, that those things are now readily available and accessible, and managers can coach to it. And the other thing is, of course, you want to have a coaching, you want to have the coaching that goes along with it.
Yes.
So we did that sort of program. We did kind of the initial launch of it, and then we did coaching sessions following up. Right. And so it was a really coordinated effort. Managers everybody really had to commit to it, because it wasn't just like, hey, let's invite this great guy to come in. Yeah. Managers had to play a role. Sales reps had to come prepared. Coaching had to occur, right? And so there was accountability. Like that's, as an enablement person, like that's, I find myself talking about accountability all the time, right? It's like, because without it, right, not much happens. So, making sure that people, learn the things that they need to learn, and that you're driving the change that you need to drive. Yeah. So those are a couple of thoughts.
I really like the mental model of pre-work, smarter on arrival, role plays, workshops, and then coaching instead of just a one-off training, inviting someone. Hey, we had a great session, was fun, inspirational. Then it's waste of time, it's waste of money, and it's opportunity cost.
And then the last thing I would add is, of course, you have to have a measurement plan, right? Exactly. So it's like, okay, well, if we have the disciplined execution framework, if we have the measurable, the quality of our execution, now we have a system for measuring, okay, we're making this investment. Which of our sales conversion rates or KPIs are we trying to impact through this training? Right? And so now you have a KPI that's attached to the training, and now you have a way to sort of evaluate whether or not it was successful.
And measure it.
That's right.
Next time when you come to Vienna, we can speak about the AI topic that you are apparently very passionate about, and how to train salespeople in, this betting cage. I think picture is very
that's right. It's great, and that's good for everybody, right? Yeah. Good for the reps ramp up quick. Good for leaders, because you can figure out, hey, who's committed to getting better, and then at the end of the day, the person that really wins is the customer. Yeah. Right, because the customer is now engaging with somebody that's better prepared,
better service, better consultative, brings more value.
This is a great example of the power of AI and technology, and how it's really, I think, the potential value that it can unlock for sales organizations and end customers. I think it's exciting.
Every of my guests gets a last question from me. I will ask you the same question that I've asked John, because it's all like in the in the area of MEDDIC. So my last question to you would be, Dick, what is the impact that you want to have on the sales world?
Yeah, I think that that I have a real passion for wanting sales organizations to be successful, and they do that by the value that they deliver to their customers. And so it's not just about sales, but it's really the field, right? It's sales, it's solution engineering, it's customer success. That when I see organizations really deliver value to customers, that are building lasting relationships, that are growing, to me, that's the most rewarding thing. So if I can be a part of that, if I can help companies to to build those relationships and ultimately achieve kind of the results and the performance that they hope, it's about helping more salespeople make club. That organizations really can be more efficient and more effective in the way that they're operating, and so I think there's still huge potential to unlock, and I'm excited to be a part of that.
Nice. Thanks a lot, Dick.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And mic drop, I would say. So bring more people to the President's Club. That's your aim. That's a great aim to have. So everyone who listens to this podcast, what's the best way to connect with you and maybe find you online? If
you can find me on LinkedIn. Dick Dunkel. I'm at Cloudera, and I've got a couple of YouTube podcasts out there. So feel free to check me out. But look forward to connecting with my audience.
Yes. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the Software Sales Formula podcast. And maybe see you soon again, maybe in Vienna, who knows?
Yeah, I would love it. It's a great city.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.